The village was silent, and in direct contrast to the constant noise of the city. I missed the buzz of London and the comforting lullaby of neon lights, screaming drunks and police sirens. But I had to run away again, and I had, with my tail between my legs and a bottle in my hand. As I lay in my childhood bed, I felt myself relax for the first time in months. I wasn't listening out for him, waiting for him to stumble in through the front door with whiskey on his breath and foreign perfume and hickeys staining his neck. I was free of the crushing sense of heartbreak that was inevitable when he passed by my bedroom door without the slightest hesitation and fell into his own. I could relax. Though relax was definitely the wrong word. I was absolutely fucked. My mother had picked me up from a friend's house in London after I drunkenly called her past midnight, sobbing and slurring. Bless her. She had come without a moment's hesitation, and within the hour I was back in the dark, sleepy village that I had been raised in. She was a kind-hearted, caring woman who deserved so much better than the wreckhead of a daughter I had become. Vodka coursed through my veins. I had nearly finished the bottle. My breath came slow and my heartbeat sputtered, a terrifying notion considering I was only a girl of 20. My lips tasted of the roll-up I had smoked apologetically outside as my mum had watched me from the kitchen window, worry knotting at her brow. All was dark, and all was silent. I must have drifted off around 3 a.m, because the alcohol in my system woke me at around 6:30 and demanded that I go downstairs and feed myself carbohydrates to try and sober up. I stumbled through the blackness, catching myself as my bare feet slipped on the carpeted stairs. I finally reached the fridge, grabbed a crust of bread, and threw myself down on the sofa. Winter was coming, and so it would remain dark for at least another hour, I guessed. Sleep would not return to me, I knew that. The looming black shape in the corner nodded as if it agreed with my pessimistic judgment. My experimentation with hard drugs and hallucinogenics meant that I was quite comfortable with the figure in the corner. I assumed it was a combination of withdrawals, tiredness, and intoxication that was causing the shadows to distort in such a manner. My vision often swam, especially recently. Things such as depth perception and being able to recognise faces was something I'd come to accept I would never fully have again. The dark mass swirled and swam across the wall and ceiling, and I watched it in a bored manner as I chewed on my bread, which I was only just realising was desperately stale. Never mind, it was the calories my body needed, taste was only of a secondary consideration. As I swept the crumbs off my chest, I heard what sounded like a small, scratching noise. The house, being an old one, often had mice problems, but those were usually in the loft, so it was unusual to hear them on a lower level. I raised my blurry eyes to the swirling shadows again. A small feeling of dread began to settle in my gut. As I tried to focus my shitty vision, I could slowly begin to distinguish the shape of a tall figure. My hallucinations had never taken form before, and I found myself frozen where I lay slouched on the sofa. Fear snapped me into sobriety almost instantly. In the darkness, I felt the thing lean in closer, even though it looked like it was emotionless. Its presence began to fill the room as if it was growing in size and flooding the space. I tried to convince myself to bolt away, to scream, to lash out, anything. My breathing was hard and fast through gritted teeth in a locked jaw. I felt it move closer, only inches away, still indistinguishable as dark touch began to trace itself up my leg. I felt another touch on my bare shoulder, as warm and soft as the other, creeping along my throat. I was frozen, paralysed as the touch on my leg crept up my thigh, till my underwear kept my dignity. The touch on my throat had moved to stroke along my jaw and trace along my lips. My eyes must have lit like broken headlights, wide and blind in panic. The touch on my thighs slipped under the hem of my panties, and it was the sickly warm touch upon my lips which finally pushed me over the edge. Years of training in taekwondo kicked in, and on instinct I raised my right leg up and smashed the heel of my foot into the approaching darkness, a wordless scream erupting through my throat. The glare of the sun through the curtains burned my eyes as the force of the kick threw me off the sofa as I crashed to the floor. I scrambled to my feet and with my arms in a fighting guard, threw myself with my back to the wall, scanning the illuminated room for whatever the fuck had been there. The kitchen door opening triggered yet another scream, which was reciprocated from my startled mother, who grabbed at her chest in terror. "Lucy, what on earth are you doing down here? Why are you screaming? It's only 8 a.m. You should get your rest." My head whipped around to look at the wall clock. She was right. It was just gone 8 a.m. I must have fallen asleep down here. I looked down at my bare thigh, to where the unpleasantly warm sensation had crept along. My pale skin was untouched, save for the tattoos. It was a hallucination. A nightmare. I'd been having them a lot recently, but this one had felt so real. I'd thrown myself across a room. I muttered an indistinct apology to my mother, and tried to step around her to return to my hovel where the curtains would still be drawn, and the comforting intoxication that lay in a glass bottle under the bed would surely welcome me back. Ma reached out, however, maybe to place a motherly hand of reassurance and affection on my shoulder, but I flinched away. Physical contact seemed repulsive. I scampered up the stairs to where the half-full bottle of vodka kissed me sweetly, with a promise of numbness and forgetfulness. I woke with an empty bottle in my hand at 7 p.m. Shit. My laptop whirred uncomfortably hot on my legs. Apparently the last thing I had drunkenly googled was how many over-the-counter anti-anxiety pills you should take to put yourself to sleep. And a video of 2 lionesses disemboweling a zebra. I had a text and 7 missed calls on my phone. The text was from my mother, saying she hoped I got some rest, and that she was spending the night up north at a conference. The calls were from my friends in London, asking how I was doing and whether I was feeling any better. I ignored them all and threw open my curtains. A small smile flickered over my lips as the sunset greeted me a good evening. Night had returned. It was time for Lucy to go out and play. I threw on a pair of shorts, my boots, and my battered jacket, the pockets of which were filled with train stubs, empty tobacco pouches, and lollipop wrappers. Through the loose change that nestled at the bottom, I managed to find what would hopefully be enough. I found his number on my phone and agreed to meet him in 20 minutes, up in a place the village is called, the Track. I grabbed my keys and was out the door as soon as I hung up. The thing about the village is that it's very, very old, and it has its quirky little charms. For example, it has no streetlights at all, nor does it have any pavements or sidewalks for any American listeners. It's a quaint village, but because of these little quirks, it's a perfect bed for criminal activity. When I was younger, my favourite pastime would be what I used to call urban exploration, but it was in reality simply breaking and entering. You have to understand, I was very easily bored as a teenager. As I made my way towards the track, I felt the familiar rush of adrenaline as I subconsciously softened my footfalls till I was nothing but a silent shadow slipping through the darkness. I was invisible, like a ghost or a demon, and it made me feel powerful. It made me feel alive. I felt a wolfish grin stretch across my face, and I wanted to do terrible things that night. The track was a muddy stretch through a dense woodland that the villagers would walk their dogs through during the day. At night, it was where you could buy drugs. I saw Mick, my dealer, from about a mile off. He was the most unsubtle drug dealer in the country, I swear down, with his obnoxious orange snapback and bright white designer shoes. He didn't hear me approach. No one ever really does. He was shifting around nervously and peering into the darkness. For a criminal, he was also very afraid of the dark. Thinking about it, I should really find a new dealer. You're right, mate. I couldn't help but snigger as he leapt about a foot into the air. Fucking hell, Luce. What are you playing at? I could have shanked you, you know. Fuck off, Mick. You don't carry a knife. This isn't London. What have you got for me? I left him shuddering in the darkness with my pockets full of an array of pills and potions. And I felt like a young god. I felt immortal. And I felt numb. It was glorious. I don't remember the walk home. All I remember is lying on the floor in the living room, my throat burning from the drip, and being vaguely aware of my mum standing in the doorway behind me. She was whispering something to me, but my head felt like it was filled with warm honey, and I struggled to focus. I couldn't move, and in the darkness, only softly illuminated by some fairy lights I supposed I had plugged in at some point, I could hear a faint scratching. The hushed noise of my mother's whispers and the scratching seemed to melt through the air, combining and creating a distorted hybrid noise. Her voice became entangled with the small scraping noises, and it made her sound like her voice was clicking as she was whispering, almost inaudibly from behind me. The noise made a spot in my spine itch, a spot which I've had itch before, and it was an awful sensation, so I knew I'd never be able to scratch it, which would slowly drive me insane until I drank enough to ignore it. The cocktail of intoxicants in my body, however, meant that even if I could move, which I couldn't, drinking anything would probably kill me. I mean, I do stupid things, but I'm not stupid. I know how to keep myself alive. The fairy lights began to flicker, as if their power was beginning to die, and a deep, unintelligible sadness swelled inside me as it began to fade. My mother was still whispering. Why couldn't she just come closer? Then I could respond. As this thought bubbled to the front of my attention, I sensed she had moved closer. She was slowly approaching from the doorway to where I lay, immobilized on the floor. The scratching was slightly louder, but I still couldn't distinguish her words. The itch in my spine spread deeper through my bones, and my jaw began to ache from where I'd been grinding my teeth all night. It was now locked, so that my breathing was harsh through bared lips. Something wasn't right. My mother, my mother was away on a conference. The person in the doorway wasn't my mother. I was paralyzed again, thanks to the drugs and thanks to the terror. I was suddenly aware that I was in my underwear again. I must have stripped off when I was peeking. As the presence grew closer from behind me, I began to make out the odd word. Fucking sleep. Through my gritted teeth, I began to hiss, and my breathing became erratic and heaving. Get the fuck away from me. Don't fucking touch me. Don't get the fuck away from me. A warm, soft touch traced along the curve of my shaking shoulders, and another along my hips. The scratching, clicking voice, genderless and soft as the wind, was right in my ear now. Despite this proximity, I still couldn't make out what it was saying. Like in a dream, when you actually try and listen to what people are saying and you realise it's all nonsense. Except this was not a dream. That touch that crept under the lace of my underwear was very, very real. As it pushed between my thighs, I felt a hot tear drip from my eyelashes, over my nose, and onto the carpet. I couldn't move, but I could weep. The sickening hot touch pushed inside my body, filling me, the source of which remained hidden behind me. I wanted to die. Of all the times I've come close to death, never had I wished it would embrace me so immediately. I wanted to tear out my own throat and bleed out, peeling my own skin from my flesh. I felt like I was being ripped open from the inside out. I'd rather whatever it was would just slip my veins. Just stop, holy fucking shit, just fucking stop. Why won't you stop? Oh my god, just fucking kill me, just... My fist whipped out as I threw my shoulder back and smashed my knuckles into the wooden side table which I had been laid next to. As I felt and heard my knuckles crunch and shatter, I used the momentum to throw myself across the floor and roll up into the corner, the tears still streaming down my face, my breathing a mess of terrified sobs. The doorway was empty. The room was empty. I was alone. The floor was covered in the remnants of what still coursed through my veins, my brain still firing unnaturally. My hand, broken and resting in an awkward angle, didn't hurt in the slightest. As I stumbled to my feet and looked into the living room mirror, I saw that my lips had swollen up to 3 times their natural size, and were a deep, bruised purple colour, whilst my eyes were black like the abyss. I was still violently high, and had chewed through my own lips. Fuck. I scrabbled through the remnants and found a collection of small blue pills. I threw 3 down my throat and allowed the abyss to embrace me. I wouldn't be hearing any more whispers tonight. I was lucky. The wounds in my mouth hadn't gotten infected, partly thanks to the amount of alcohol I'd consumed, which had kept them suitably clean. I couldn't eat anything for a solid week, and had to pop the codeine every 2 hours, or else the slightest facial movement would send me into crippling agony. God, codeine was gorgeous. All hail codeine. The swelling didn't go down completely for a week and a half. I told my mum I'd been mugged. The guy had punched me in the face and I had bitten through my tongue. My knuckles had been broken as I'd fallen. She cried and said she was just grateful that he had only mugged me. I flinched as the words left her mouth. I was half convinced that I'd hallucinated it, that my lifestyle was finally starting to break me. The toll of the previous few years finally catching up to me, and my sanity, maybe it was my sanity, starting to slip. God, I hope not. I'm far too pretty for insanity. I ignored my studies, and they ignored me. I was too smart for my own good, and I knew I could catch up once I was sober. If I ever got sober. London welcomed me back with a week-long session of stimulants and casual sex. It was a blur of white powder and flesh. I tasted sweat and blood on my tongue. Names were insignificant. I only cared for how far they were willing to go. I found 2 girls willing to share a bed with me simultaneously. I found a boy who would let me slap at his face and drag my nails so hard across his back that he bled into the sheets. Drugs and alcohol found their way to me all by themselves. I was a vampire. I operated only in the night, where the shadows hid my sins, and the moon forgave me for them. I was numb to the memories of heartbreak, and the horrors that had revealed themselves to me in the village. The bed was slick with sweat. As I rode atop a man I'd already forgotten the name of. His skin, the colour of coffee, shimmered in the half-light. His eyes were blown wide, and his hands gripped my hips firmly, but not harshly. I held his jaw in my hand, ensuring he couldn't look away from the steady gaze I held on him. He whimpered slightly and caught his own lip in a soft bite. He couldn't have known what was coming for him. He rolled me off the pant and lay behind me so that we were both on our sides. It happened like gunfire, sudden and devastating. He had placed his warm hand on the inside of my thigh. My elbow shot back and smashed into his nose as I flipped around and struck him again in the jaw, feeling it unhinge under the devastation of the blow. Before he could even scream in surprise or pain, the blood gushing from his nose caught in his throat and he gurgled, lashing out blindly. His naked body thrashed in panic as I struck him again and again in the face, my knee pushing down on his chest and pinning him to the mattress. As I struck him once more, his skull smashed with a sickening thwack on the headboard, and he stopped struggling. His face was a mess. I clambered off of him, my breathing laboured, but not distressed. He wasn't breathing at all. I searched my clothing on the floor and pulled it on disinterestedly. I left his house, and I forgot about him instantly. As I walked down the dark street, my footfalls were steady and controlled. I slipped my fingers into my pocket and found my little pouch of pills and powders. I dosed myself and my vision became sharper, my footsteps lighter. I was immortal. I was a young god, and I owned this city. From the shadows of the alleyways I felt their presence, all the swirling, shifting blacknesses, the figures in the corners of rooms, those which hovered in doorways, out of sight but always there. They stared at me from the blackness, and I stared back. I grinned wolfishly. They were evil, horrendous, wretched demons. But I was worse.